had watched the stars for 600 years. His species lived long lives, and he had spent most of his watching planets that no one cared about. The Galactic Observation Council assigned him to monitor Class 3 worlds. These were the dead places, the impossible places, worlds so dangerous that no intelligent species could ever live on them. For 600 years, nothing interesting had happened. Watched storms that could tear apart metal. He recorded volcanic eruptions that painted entire continents with fire. He documented radiation levels that would kill most life forms in seconds. He did his job well, but it was boring work. Class 3 planets were graveyards. Everyone knew this. Then everything changed. The alarm on his console made a sound he had never heard before. Floated toward the screen, his long body moving through the zero gravity of the observation station. His 4 eyes focused on the data, and for a long moment he could not understand what he was seeing. A ship had entered the atmosphere of 7. This was impossible. 7 was one of the worst Class 3 planets in the sector. The gravity was more than 3 times standard. The atmosphere was filled with chemicals that could eat through most metals. Lightning storms covered half the planet at all times. The temperature swung from burning hot to freezing cold within hours. No ship could land there. No species would be foolish enough to try. Yet the data was clear. A vessel had entered the atmosphere. It was not falling. It was not crashing. It was descending in a controlled manner, slowing down, choosing where to land. Checked his instruments. They were working correctly. He checked again. Still correct. He checked a 3rd time because he could not believe what he was seeing. The ship landed. Immediately sent a message to the council headquarters. His appendages were shaking as he typed. In 600 years, he had never sent an emergency report. He had never needed to. While he waited for a response, he focused all his sensors on the alien vessel. It was small by galactic standards, perhaps 50 meters long. The design was strange. It looked heavy and solid, built from metals that seemed primitive. There were no energy shields that he could detect, no advanced protection systems, just thick walls of simple alloy. How had it survived the descent? The friction alone should have torn it apart. The corrosive atmosphere should have eaten through the hull. The electromagnetic storms should have destroyed every system on board. The ship sat on the volcanic plain, and it was fine. Then the hatch opened. Felt something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. Real fear. The kind that made his species freeze in place, that turned their blood cold, that reminded them that the universe was vast and dangerous and full of things they did not understand. 2 figures walked out of the ship. They moved on 2 legs, which was unusual but not unheard of in the galaxy. They were covered in some kind of suit, but the suits looked thin, fragile, nothing that should protect them from the environment they had just entered. The gravity of 7 was 3.2 times standard. This meant that a being who weighed 100 units on a normal world would weigh 320 units here. Most species could not even stand in such gravity. Their bones would break. Their organs would fail. They would be crushed by their own weight. These creatures walked. They walked easily as if the gravity was nothing special. They moved around their ship, checking equipment, looking at the landscape, pointing at things in the distance. Translator began processing the sounds they made. They were communicating with each other using vibrations in the air, primitive but functional. After a few moments, the translator provided text. The readings are amazing. This storm system could power our entire country for 100 years. I know, mark the coordinates. Command will want to send a full survey team. They were not scared. They were not struggling to survive. They were working. They were doing their jobs as if standing on a Class 3 planet was normal. The response from Council headquarters arrived. High Arbiter herself was demanding more information. Sent everything he had. The ship, the landing, the 2 creatures walking around in an environment that should have killed them instantly. For several hours he watched them work. They collected samples from the ground. They set up small machines that measured things. They took pictures of the landscape. Sometimes they talked to each other, and the translator caught pieces of their conversation. "The mineral deposits here are incredible," the one called said. "We hit the jackpot." "Don't celebrate yet," the one called replied. "We need to check the eastern ridge before the storm gets closer." They looked at the massive lightning storm on the horizon. It was the kind of storm that could destroy observation drones. The kind of storm that had killed 3 automated probes that had sent to the surface over the centuries. The two creatures looked at it and decided to walk toward it. Watch them go. They moved steadily across the broken ground, climbing over rocks, avoiding pools of liquid that would have been toxic to almost any known life form. They reached the ridge they wanted, did their work, and returned to their ship just as the storm arrived. The storm hit the ship with everything it had. Lightning struck the hull again and again. Winds that could move mountains pushed against the vessel. Rain made of weak acid fell in sheets. Inside the ship, the creatures called humans made something to eat and went asleep. Stayed at his console all night. He could not sleep. He could not look away. He had spent 600 years believing that Class 3 planets were places of death. Now 2 creatures were using one as a campsite. By morning, the council had reached a decision. They were sending a full observation team. They were classifying this as a first contact situation. They were preparing for something that had not happened in thousands of years. The discovery of a new intelligent species. But knew, somehow, that this was different from the other first contacts he had read about in the historical records. Those species had been found on comfortable worlds. They had developed slowly, carefully, in environments that made sense. These humans came from somewhere else. Somewhere that made them strong enough to walk on death worlds. Somewhere that made them brave enough to land where no one else dared. As filed his final report for the night, he wrote a note at the bottom. It was not official. It was just his own thought, but he felt it was important. "We have found something new. I do not know if this is good or bad. I only know that the galaxy will never be the same." He was right. Captain Park woke up to the sound of wind screaming against the hull of the Steady Hand. She lay in her bunk for a moment, listening to the storm outside. It had been going all night. The ship's computer said the winds were reaching speeds of 400 kilometers per hour. Lightning had struck the hull 17 times while she slept. She smiled. This was a good day. Had been a stellar explorer for 12 years. She had walked on frozen moons and burning deserts. She had climbed mountains on worlds with barely any air and swam in oceans that were more acid than water. Every mission taught her the same lesson. The universe was hard, and the only way to survive was to be harder. She got out of bed and did her morning exercises. In the heavy gravity of 7, every movement was work. A simple push-up felt like lifting a small vehicle, but had trained for this. Her muscles burned, but they did not fail. Humans had learned long ago that their bodies could adapt to almost anything if they pushed hard enough. After her exercises, she went to the small kitchen and made breakfast. Rice and vegetables and protein mix. Simple food that would give her energy for a long day of work. She was halfway through her meal when Lieutenant walked in. Was younger than her by 5 years. He had a round face and quick eyes that missed nothing. He was the best survey specialist she had ever worked with. He could look at a piece of rock and tell you what minerals were inside it, how old it was, and whether it was worth the trouble of mining. "Morning, Captain," he said, sitting down across from her. "Storm's dying down. We should have a clear window in about 2 hours." "Good, what's on the schedule?" "I want to check the southern crater. The readings from yesterday suggest there might be a vein of rare metals running underneath it. If I'm right, this planet just became very valuable." Nodded, then we checked the southern crater. They finished their breakfast and prepared for the day's work. Outside, the storm was indeed fatting. The lightning became less frequent. The wind dropped from deadly to merely dangerous. By the time they suited up and stepped outside, the sky had cleared enough to see the distant mountains. 7 was not a beautiful world, but it was impressive. The ground was a mix of black rock and rust-colored sand. Steam rose from cracks where underground heat reached the surface. In the distance, volcanoes painted the horizon with orange light. Everything about this place screamed danger. Everything about this place said that life should not be here. But were here, and they had work to do. They walked for an hour to reach the southern crater. The gravity made every step feel like walking through deep mud. Their suits protected them from the toxic air, but they could feel the heat pressing against them. Normal humans would have collapsed long ago. But were not normal humans. They were stellar explorers. They had been trained and modified and hardened until planets like this were just another job. The crater was massive. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, a giant bowl carved into the earth by some ancient impact. Immediately began taking readings with his equipment. His eyes grew wider as he looked at the data. "Captain," he said, "this is bigger than I thought, much bigger." "How much bigger?" The mineral deposits here could supply the entire colonial expansion program for 50 years, maybe more. He looked up at her, and his face was serious. "This changes everything. This single planet could make humanity one of the wealthiest species in the galaxy." Felt her heart beat faster, but she kept her expression calm. She was the captain. She had to be steady. "Let's confirm the readings before we get excited. Check the northern edge of the crater. I'll check the southern." They split up and worked for several hours. The data kept getting better. Every reading confirmed what it found. 7 was a treasure world. A planet that the rest of the galaxy had written off as worthless was actually one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the sector. What no one else had realized was simple. The value was there because no one else could survive long enough to claim it. As they worked, neither of them knew they were being watched. High above them, hidden in the orbit of 7's largest moon, the Galactic Observation Council had gathered a fleet of ships. 47 species had sent representatives. All of them stared at screens showing 2 tiny figures walking across a death world. Was there explaining what he had seen. His voice was steady, but his appendages trembled slightly. "They arrived yesterday," he said. "They landed without difficulty. They walked outside in suits that should provide no protection. They slept through a storm that would have destroyed any of our vessels. And now they are surveying the planet as if it were a garden world." High Arbiter was the most powerful being in the room. She had ruled the council for 3,000 years. In all that time, she had never seen anything that surprised her. But today, she was surprised. "What are they?" she asked. "They call themselves humans," answered. "They come from a planet called Earth, in a system we classified as unremarkable 200 years ago. We did not contact them because our surveys showed their technology was too primitive." "Primitive?" Pointed at the screen, where was climbing down a cliff face that would have killed most beings in the room. "Does that look primitive to you?" Had no answer. The council members argued for hours. Some said the humans must be using technology they could not detect. Others said the readings must be wrong. A few suggested that this was some kind of trick, though no one could explain what kind of trick it might be. In the end, made a decision. "We need more information. We need to understand what these humans are, and we need to find out if they are a threat." "A threat?" asked Ambassador. "They are 2 individuals on a planet. How can they be a threat?" Looked at the screen for a long moment. The human called had reached the bottom of the cliff. She was standing in a pool of liquid that would have dissolved in seconds. She was collecting samples as if she were picking flowers. "Any species that can do what they are doing," said slowly, "is a threat simply by existing. If they can survive here, where can't they survive? If they can claim this world, what worlds can't they claim? If we cannot do what they do, then we are not their equals. We are their prey." The room went silent. No one wanted to believe her, but no one could argue with her logic. On the surface of 7, and had finished their survey. They walked back to the steady hand as the sun began to set, painting the toxic sky in shades of red and purple. "Good day," said. "Very good day," agreed. "Command is going to be happy." She had no idea that her simple survey mission had just changed the course of galactic history. The Galactic Council argued for 3 days before they decided what to do. Some wanted to observe the humans from a distance, learning everything they could before making contact. Others wanted to quarantine the planet and keep the humans trapped there. A few extremists suggested more violent options, but they were quickly silenced. In the end, Ambassador volunteered to make first contact. Was old, even by the standards of her long-lived species. She had negotiated peace between warring empires. She had welcomed 17 new species into the galactic community. She had never failed at a diplomatic mission. But as her pod descended towards 7, she felt something she had not felt in centuries: uncertainty. Her pod was state-of-the-art technology. Triple-layered shields protected her from the radiation. Gravity dampeners kept her comfortable despite the crushing weight outside. Air filters cleaned every molecule before it entered her breathing space. The pod could survive almost anything. But she still refused to land. She hovered 1 kilometer above the surface, a safe distance from the human ship. She told herself this was proper protocol. Deep down, she knew it was fear. She broadcast the universal greeting on all frequencies. It was a mathematical signal designed to be understood by any intelligent species. She had used it 17 times before. It had always worked. The response came faster than she expected. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Park of the Korean Stellar Exploration Corps. We receive your transmission. Do you require assistance?" The translator processed the message, but had trouble understanding it. The humans were asking if she needed help. She was the ambassador of the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. She was here to offer contact to a primitive species. Why would she need their help? Then she realized the truth. The humans did not know they were primitive. To them, this situation was normal. A strange ship had appeared and they were offering aid. It was basic courtesy. "We wish to establish communication," replied. "Your presence here is unexpected. This world is classified as uninhabitable." There was a pause. Then a sound came through the speakers that the translator struggled to identify. It was a series of short, rhythmic vocalizations. The translator eventually labeled it as laughter. "Uninhabitable. This is Tuesday for us, Ambassador. You should see what our ancestors survived back on Earth." Did not know what Tuesday meant, but she understood the tone. The humans were not impressed by 7. To them, it was nothing special. "I would like to meet in person," she said, "to discuss formal relations between our peoples." Another pause. This time, the human's voice was more careful. "Ambassador, with respect, you're hovering a kilometer away in what looks like a heavily shielded pod. Our ship's sensors show you can't survive outside that pod for more than a few seconds. How exactly would we meet?" Felt her face flush with embarrassment. The human was right. She could not meet them on the surface. She could not invite them to her pod because it was too small. Any meeting would require one side to take a significant risk. The human solved the problem. "Tell you what," Captain said, "we'll come to you. Our shuttle can dock with most standard airlock configurations. Send us your specifications and we'll figure it out." "You would come to me." "Sure, we're curious about you too. Give us an hour." Floated in her pod, stunned. The primitive species was offering to adapt to her needs. They were willing to fly a shuttle through the deadly atmosphere, dock with an alien vessel they had never seen before, and meet a representative of a civilization that could easily destroy them. Either the humans were incredibly brave, or they were incredibly stupid. was beginning to suspect it was the former. 1 hour later, a small shuttle lifted off from the human ship, watched it climb through the toxic clouds, buffeted by winds that would have destroyed most vessels. It flew directly toward her pod, smooth and confident. The docking was clumsy but successful. The human shuttle had equipment that could adapt to different airlock shapes. Within minutes, they had created a seal between the two vessels. The door opened, and saw a human up close for the first time. Captain Park was smaller than she expected. The human stood about average height for a sentient species. She had dark hair tied back from her face and brown eyes that studied with open curiosity. She was wearing a simple uniform instead of her protective suit. Behind her stood Lieutenant, equally curious, equally unafraid. "Ambassador," said, bowing slightly, "thank you for receiving us. We're honored to make first contact with your people." Tried to gather her diplomatic training. She had a speech prepared. She had protocols to follow, but none of them seemed to fit this situation. "How?" she finally asked. "How did you land on that planet? How did you survive?" Smiled. It was a strange expression, showing teeth in a way that would be threatening in many species. But on humans it seemed friendly. "We're human," she said simply. "This is what we do." Over the next several hours they talked, asked questions, and the humans answered. They talked about Earth, their home planet. They talked about their history. They talked about the ships and technology that had brought them to the stars. What learned terrified her. Humans came from a planet that would be classified as a Class 2 world. Not quite as dangerous as 7, but close. Their world had extreme temperatures, violent weather, constant earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and a magnetic field that barely protected them from their own sun. Worse, the humans had evolved there. They had spent millions of years fighting for survival against predators, diseases, natural disasters, and each other. Every generation that lived had to be tough enough to survive. The weak died. The strong passed on their strength. "Your species evolved on a death world," said, her voice quiet with shock. Laughed, "We just call it home." But the thing that bothered most was not what the humans had survived. It was how they talked about it. They were not proud or boastful. They were not bitter or angry. They simply accepted that life was hard and they had to be harder. When talked about humans walking for days without water in ancient deserts, she spoke as if this were normal. When mentioned that early humans hunted prey by chasing it until it collapsed from exhaustion, he spoke as if anyone would do the same. They did not seem to understand how extraordinary they were. "Your ships," said, "they have no energy shields, no gravity dampeners. Your hull is made of simple metal. How do you travel through space?" Shrugged, "We build them strong, we train our crews well, and we accept that sometimes things go wrong." "You accept that your ships might fail." "We accept that anything might fail. We prepare as best we can and then we go anyway. If we waited until everything was perfectly safe, we would never have left our caves." Stared at her. This was the philosophy of the human species. Not caution, not safety, not careful planning that eliminated all risk, just preparation, courage, and acceptance. They were insane, and they had reached the stars. "I must report to the council," said finally. "They will want to know everything I have learned." "Of course," said. "We have a lot of questions too. Maybe we can learn from each other." She extended her hand, had researched human customs. She knew this was a greeting ritual. She reached out with one of her own appendages and touched the human's hand. It was warm, strong, alive. "Thank you for coming," said. "Thank you for calling," replied. "We're going to be good friends, I can feel it." As the human shuttle detached and flew back to the surface, began composing her report. She wrote for hours, trying to explain what she had learned. In the end, she summarized it in one sentence. "The humans are not what we expected. They are worse, and they are wonderful." The council chamber had never been so crowded. Representatives from every major species filled the massive room. They floated, sat, stood, or hung from the ceiling depending on their biology. All of them had come to hear ambassadors report on the humans. Stood at the center of the chamber. She had been speaking for 2 hours. She had shown them recordings from her meeting. She had shared data about the human ship and its crew. She had explained everything she had learned. The reaction was not good. "Impossible," said Representative N of the. His species looked like giant insects with armor-plated skin. They were considered among the toughest beings in the galaxy. No biological entity can survive Class 3 conditions. These humans must be using technology we cannot detect. "I have provided all the sensor data," replied calmly. "Their suits are made of simple fabric and metal. Their ship is built from iron, carbon, and titanium. There is no hidden technology. They simply do not need it." "Then they must be some kind of artificial beings, robots designed to look organic." Had expected this argument. She activated another display showing detailed scans of the two humans. "They are completely biological. Organs, bones, blood, muscles, everything is natural. They are simply built differently than us." The chamber erupted in argument. Species that had not spoken to each other in centuries shouted across the room. Old enemies united in their disbelief. Old friends argued about what this meant. High Arbiter raised one of her many arms, calling for silence. The chamber slowly quieted. "Ambassador," said, "you have told us what the humans can do. Now tell us why. What makes them different from every other species we have encountered?" Took a deep breath. This was the part of her report she had dreaded. "The humans evolved on a planet called Earth," she began. "Our surveys 200 years ago classified it as a borderline Class 2 world. Extreme temperature variations, constant geological activity, dangerous solar radiation. The planet is trying to kill everything that lives on it." She paused, but the humans did not avoid this. They did not evolve to escape the dangers. They evolved to fight them. Their bodies are the result of millions of years of survival against impossible odds. A new display appeared, showing human biology in detail. Their bones are dense and strong. When broken, they heal back stronger than before. Their muscles can work for hours without rest when they need to. Their hearts pump blood through bodies that can regulate temperature across a wide range. She pointed to the human brain. But the most remarkable feature is here. Human brains can ignore pain when survival requires it. They can push through exhaustion that would kill other species. They can adapt to new environments faster than any being we have studied. Representative Eth of the spoke up. Her species was known for their advanced medical technology. "Every adaptation you describe would require energy. How do they fuel these abilities?" "They eat almost anything," said. "Plants, animals, fungi. Their digestive systems can process toxic substances that would kill most species. They can survive for weeks without food if necessary, and they can eat until they are sick if food is available. They are designed for feast and famine." The chamber was silent now. Everyone was listening. "But the most dangerous thing about humans," continued, "is not their bodies. It is their minds." She showed recordings from her meeting. Captain laughing about walking on a death world. Lieutenant casually mentioning that early humans hunted by running animals to death. "They do not know fear the way we do," explained. "Oh, they feel it, but they do not obey it. To a human, fear is just information. It tells them that something is dangerous, but it does not tell them to stop. They evaluate the danger, make a plan, and then they act anyway." High Arbiter leaned forward. "You are saying they are fearless." "No, I am saying they are brave. There is a difference. Fearless beings do not understand danger. Brave beings understand danger and face it anyway. Humans are the bravest species I have ever encountered." She showed one final recording. It was from the human ship's database, shared freely during her visit. It showed the history of human space exploration. The chamber watched humans strap themselves to rockets filled with explosive fuel. They watched humans travel to their moon in vehicles that were barely more than metal boxes. They watched humans build space stations by hand, floating in the void with nothing between them and death but a thin suit. They did not have the technology we have, said. They did not have shields or gravity control or faster-than-light travel, so they went without those things. They accepted that some of them would die, and they went anyway. A recording showed a human spacecraft failing. Fire, explosion, death. Then another recording showed humans building a new spacecraft and trying again. They do not stop, said. They have never stopped. Every time the universe tried to kill them, they learned from it and tried again. Every disaster made them smarter. Every failure made them more determined. She turned off the display and faced the council directly. We have spent thousands of years building a civilization based on safety. We mapped the galaxy and labeled the dangerous places. We avoided the Class 3 worlds because they could kill us. We stayed in our comfortable zones because comfort is logical. Her voice grew stronger. The humans did not have that option. Their home was dangerous. Their history was dangerous. Their very existence was dangerous, so they became dangerous too. Representative N spoke again, but his voice was quieter now. What do they want? Why are they here? They want what we all want: resources, knowledge, room to grow. The difference is that they will go places we never dared to go. They will claim worlds we wrote off as worthless. They will build an empire on planets that would kill any other species. High Arbiter asked the question that everyone was thinking. Are they a threat to us? Considered her answer carefully. They are not aggressive without reason. Captain was friendly and open. Lieutenant was curious and eager to learn. They offered to share their knowledge freely. They asked questions and listened to answers. She paused. But if we try to stop them, if we try to contain them, if we treat them as enemies, then yes, they will be the greatest threat this galaxy has ever seen, because they will not stop. They cannot stop. It is not in their nature. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then High Arbiter spoke. What do you recommend, Ambassador? Had thought about this question for 3 days. She had considered every option. In the end, only one answer made sense. Make them our friends, she said. Welcome them into the galactic community. Share our knowledge with them and learn from their knowledge in return. Give them room to grow and grow alongside them. And if we cannot be their friends? Looked at the image of Captain still displayed on the screen. A small human, standing on a world that should have killed her, smiling as if she had not a care in the universe. Then pray, said, pray that they remember we tried. Captain Park stood on the observation deck of the Steady Hand, watching the sunset over 7. The planet looked the same as it had when she first arrived. Volcanic plains, toxic atmosphere, lightning storms dancing across the horizon, but everything else had changed. Below her ship, the first human settlement on the planet was taking shape. Dome buildings made of reinforced steel, mining equipment that could dig through the hardest rock, landing pads that welcomed ships from across the galaxy. New Sol, they called it, the first human city on a Class 3 world. Still had trouble believing how fast everything had happened. After her meeting with Ambassador, the galaxy had exploded with interest in humanity. Ships from dozens of species had come to observe, to study, to talk. Most of them were curious. Some were afraid. A few were hostile. But humans, being humans, had made friends with almost all of them. The door behind her opened and Chief Engineer walked in. Was new to the crew, a recent graduate from the Korean Space Academy. She was young and brilliant and completely unafraid of anything. Captain said, the delegation is asking for a tour of the reactor again. Smiled. They were a warrior species, proud and fierce. They had come to 7 expecting to find weak beings who survived through luck and tricks. Instead, they had found humans, and they had not known what to do. The turning point had come when a warrior challenged Lieutenant to a test of strength. The warrior was twice size and covered in natural armor. Everyone expected the human to refuse or be destroyed. Instead, had accepted. He lost the test of pure strength, of course. He was not as big or as naturally powerful as but he did not give up. He kept trying for 3 hours, long after the warrior was exhausted and wanted to stop. In the end, the warrior had surrendered just to make the human stop fighting. They had become humanity's strongest allies after that. They respected persistence. They understood the will to fight even when victory seemed impossible. They saw in humans a kindred spirit. Give them the full tour, told. Show them how the reactor works. Answer every question, hold nothing back. Are you sure that's classified technology? Shook her head. Not anymore. The council decided that humanity should share freely. We give them our knowledge, they give us theirs. Everyone wins. It had been a difficult decision for the governments back on Earth. Humanity had spent centuries fighting among themselves, keeping secrets, guarding advantages. But facing a galaxy of strange species had changed things. Suddenly, old enemies were all just humans. Suddenly, sharing knowledge meant survival for the whole species, not defeat. The galaxy was changing too. Ambassador had visited New Sol last month. She had walked through the city without a protective suit, breathing filtered air through a simple mask. It was the first time in 10,000 years that a member of her species had touched planetary soil. Why now? Had asked her. Had looked around at the human city, at the people walking through streets in what should have been a deadly environment. Because you showed us it was possible, she said. Because you taught us that fear is just information, not a command. Other species were learning the same lesson. The masters of medical technology were studying human biology to understand how humans healed so fast. The who had avoided radiation for were learning from human technology that let people survive in harsh environments. Even the Galactic Council itself was changing, starting to discuss expanding into regions that had once been labeled as forbidden. Humans were not just joining the galaxy, they were transforming it. Not everyone was happy about this. Some species resented the newcomers who walked where others feared to go. Some species worried that humans would take everything, claim every world, leave nothing for others. There had been protests. There had been threats. But humans had dealt with those too. When a hostile fleet had blocked the route to a human colony ship, demanding that humans stay in their own sector, had been sent to negotiate. She had gone to the flagship of the hostile fleet alone, in a small shuttle, with no weapons and no backup. The hostile admiral had thought she was surrendering. He had been wrong. Had spent 3 days on that ship. She had talked with the admiral. She had eaten meals with the crew. She had learned about their fears, their hopes, their reasons for opposing humanity. And she had shared her own stories. Stories of human history. Stories of struggle and survival. Stories of people who had every reason to give up but never did. By the end of the 3rd day, the admiral had ordered his fleet to stand down. He had become the first member of his species to request formal relations with Earth. He said that anyone who could face death with such calm determination deserved respect, not hostility. That was the human way, not conquest, not domination, just stubborn persistence until enemies became friends. Lieutenant found still watching the sunset. They're ready for us, he said. The new survey team is assembling. They want to check out that planet in the next system. 8. Raised an eyebrow. What's 8 like? Worse than here. Gravity at 4.1. Atmosphere is actually flammable. Surface temperature averages around 300 degrees. He paused. The council says it's a Class 4 world, completely impossible to colonize. Smiled. She looked out at the city that humans had built on an impossible world. She thought about the millions of years her ancestors had spent surviving an impossible planet. She thought about the history of her species, climbing from caves to stars through sheer determination. "You know what we should do," she said. Grinned, he already knew the answer. Prove them wrong. Prove them wrong. 2 weeks later, the steady hand lifted off from New Seoul. It carried a crew of 12 humans, the best explorers in the Korean Stellar Exploration Corps. It carried equipment designed to survive conditions that would kill any other beings in the galaxy. It carried hope and determination, and the stubborn human refusal to accept the word impossible. As the ship climbed through the atmosphere of 7, opened a channel to the Galactic Observation Station still orbiting above them. "Observer," she said, "we're heading to 8, we'll send you our findings." There was a long pause. Then's voice came through, tired and amazed in equal measure. "Captain, you cannot survive on 8. It is categorically impossible." Laughed. It was a warm sound, full of joy and confidence, and the absolute certainty that nothing in the universe could stop her. "We're humans," she said. "Watch us." The steady hand turned toward the stars and flew into the darkness. Behind it, a galaxy that had stayed the same for 1,000,000 years began to change. Worlds that had been abandoned were being claimed. Frontiers that had been forbidden were being crossed. Species that had never dared to dream were learning to hope. All because 2 small humans had landed on a death world and walked around like they owned the place. Watched the human ship disappear into the distance. He had been watching humans for a year now. He had seen them do things that should not be possible. He had seen them smile in the face of death and laugh at the idea of giving up. He still did not fully understand them. He suspected he never would. But he knew one thing for certain. The humans were going to change everything. They were going to explore every corner of the galaxy, claim every world they could reach, and push against every boundary that existed. And somehow, against all logic and reason, they were going to succeed. Because that was what humans did. They survived, they adapted, they pushed forward. And they never, ever stopped.